to the death and beyond. Silent Rage.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the classic 1982 Chuck Norris film, Silent Rage. The film is directed by Michael Miller and obviously stars Chuck Norris as well as Ron Silver, Stephen Keats, Tony Callum and Brian Libby. Now the film focuses on Chuck Norris's character Dan Stevens, who is a sheriff. He essentially takes down a killer. This killer who goes mad. He's under the care of a doctor, Tom Hallman, played by Ron Silver. He loses his mind and he ends up going on a bit of a killing spree. Chuck Norris takes him down. Everybody thinks he essentially is dead, but then he is experimented on by these doctors who give him like this serum that essentially turns him into like an indestructible killing machine. Who then escapes again and goes on a killing rampage, and it's up to the mighty Chuck Norris to bring down this unstoppable threat. Right, what are my thoughts on Silent Rage? Well, this is a film I haven't seen for such a long time, many years ago, and to be honest, I couldn't remember an awful lot about it, other than it was like, as many people describe this film, it is essentially Chuck Norris versus Michael Myers, and that's, you know, a very familiar story that you will hear from people who are talking about this film. It's essentially is Chuck Norris against Michael Myers. You've got this unstoppable killer machine, and what could Chuck Norris do against that? Somebody who can't die, won't be stopped, can't be shot, all that kind of stuff, and it makes for a really interesting premise. Now, I think this film can be forgiven a lot. It's 1982, not a massive budget behind it, even though it's Columbia Pictures. And it's at times this film is very much of its time. And there's parts of this film that just have aged quite terribly. And there's if you can forgive some of this film's I don't know, failings, then what you've got underneath all that is a very enjoyable film for the most part. I'm going to list the things that I didn't like about this film, first of all. The relationship stuff between Chuck Norris and Alison, she's called. An old flame. They kind of get back together. It doesn't really work. Chuck Norris at this stage in his career, you know, I mean, he could never say that Chuck Norris is the finest actor you'll ever see, but at this stage in 1982, it was still very much still the strong silent type, and it just didn't work, this relationship, and it was so old-fashioned as well, in the sense of, you know, she's slapping him one minute, telling him she hates him, and then the next minute she's going to his house and practically begging him to, you know, to get with her and all this kind of stuff, and it was a terrible part for this poor actress, Tony Callum, at the time. And she's only really there to be a bit of a scream queen, I suppose. So that really doesn't work. His partner, Chuck Norris's partner, played by Stephen First, just doesn't fit this film. It's just, they try and put this comedy sidekick almost into this film, and it just feels completely unnecessary and very unbalanced, and he's like the worst police officer you've ever seen, and Chuck Norris just keeps tolerating him, and he keeps saying he actually says to him at one point, I think you're going to be a fine police officer, and you're like, really? He is abysmal. And I found his character grating, I can't lie. And it's one of those films as well that there's a scene, for example, in this film where the doctors realise what they've created and they decide to try and put this guy down. So they say, oh, why don't we do this? Let's inject him with this, so this acid sort of thing. So they've got this bottle in this lab with bubbling acid in it, with written on the front, sulfuric, just in case you didn't realise this was dangerous, it's got written on it in the front for us to see, sulfuric acid, and he gets it all up in the syringe. How he didn't melt the syringe, I don't know, but we won't talk about that. So it's properly dumbed down for its audience, this. So if you can get over many of those pitfalls that I've mentioned and look at them really as quirkiness, cheesiness, you will find underneath here quite a unique film, I think, in Chuck Norris's filmography. It treads gingerly into the horror, for sure. It's definitely trying to pick up on the trend at the time, which was like, unstoppable killers, the Jasons and your Michael Myers, so on and so forth. It's trying to be that. It's trying to be a little bit different and unique. It doesn't always work, but I think the last 20 minutes of this film is really watchable, maybe 25 minutes, something like that, where he kind of confronts this killer, Chuck Norris, and it's almost like they kind of fight to the death, whatever you want to call it, and it is pretty good, and it's some pretty cool fight scenes in it as well, the film overall, even if some of the fight scenes feel like they've just been added to the film to make Chuck Norris look cool and show off his martial arts, which is fine. We all like watching that. But again, very old-fashioned. You would never get away with it today. There's a scene in a bar where Chuck Norris takes on a lot of bikers, and it's one of those things where people just charge it in one at a time and he takes them out. Modern audiences wouldn't tolerate that. You want to see something far more realistic. But it's still fun to watch Chuck Norris kick a lot of, of biker gangs' asses, if you like. So I think what we have here is something a little bit different, that sits a little bit different in his filmography. They tried a lot of things here, and as I've explained, I don't think everything worked. But underneath this, I think is at times a really fun and entertaining Chuck Norris film. That I'm glad I revisited. Like I say, it's such a long time since I've seen this film, and it is a lot of fun at times. It definitely stands out in his filmography as something different. He hasn't done a film like this very often, Chuck Norris, and definitely one worth checking out if you've never seen Silent Rage. It's definitely a Chuck Norris film that you need to be checking out if you're a fan of Chuck Norris from that period in his career. I'm more familiar, I'll be honest, I'm more familiar with Chuck Norris from like the mid-80s onwards. His earlier work, I'm not massively familiar with, which I want to refamiliarize myself with to continue these reviews that I'm doing on Chuck Norris. So let me know in the comments what you think some of his earlier work I should be checking out with. A Force of One I think I'm going to do, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I did really enjoy this. It was a fun film to revisit, but it definitely is a film that at times kind of makes you cringe a little bit. I suppose it's definitely a film of the early 80s. So thanks for joining me, guys. I hope you enjoyed checking out this review. I'll be back with more content on the channel very, very soon.